Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are strapping ourselves into the sonic cockpit, getting ready for takeoff with one of the most, distinctive effects out there, the flanger.
Yeah, that unmistakable sweep.
Exactly. And specifically, we're doing an in-depth exploration of the Ball SS BF series. We're going to trace the line from the very beginning, that massive analog BF1.
Right, the big one.
All the way up to the BF3, the digital workhorse we see today.
And our mission, really, it's more than just listing features, isn't it? We want to get under the hood, understand how Boss S took this really complex studio effect.
Tape flanging originally.
Exactly. Tape flanging, something done with, two big tape machines and somehow squeezed it into a stomp box. And how that whole journey, that engineering process, really defined the sound of flanging for, generations of players.
So we're tracking how portable modulation even became a thing. From those big AC units,
Like the BF1,
through the iconic compact pedals,
the BF2.
and then into the digital age. It's really about decoding, kind of, BRSS's sonic DNA, you could say, and seeing how it adapted over time.
Yeah, how technology shaped the sound.
Before we jump into the history, though, maybe let's just quickly nail down the sound itself. When we say flanging, what are we actually talking about?
We're talking about that sweep, that whoosh. People always say jet engine, right?
Yeah, that's the classic description.
It's that metallic swirling texture. Technically, it comes from using really short delay times. We're talking typically under 20 milliseconds.
Tiny delays.
Yeah, super short. And the magic happens when you mix your original dry signal with that slightly delayed signal. But, and this is the key, that delay time isn't static. It's constantly being swept, modulated, usually by an LFO, a low-frequency oscillator.
So the delay time is moving.
Right. As it sweeps back and forth, the delayed signal goes in and out of phase with the original. This cancels out certain frequencies, creates these moving notches in the sound. That's the comb filtering effect you hear.
Yeah.
That's what gives flanging its dynamic, sweeping character.
Gotcha. And back in the late 70s, when BSS wanted to put this in a pedal, they couldn't exactly fit two tape machines inside, right?
No. Definitely not. So they needed something else to create that short, variable delay. And that's where the hero of so much analog modulation comes in, the Bucket Brigade delay chip, the BBD.
Ah, the BBD.
Essential stuff.
Absolutely crucial for this whole era. BBDs basically store the analog audio signal for a tiny moment and then pass it along a chain of stages, kind of like, well, the name says it all, like firemen passing buckets of water.
Okay, I can picture that.
And the speed at which those buckets get passed along, that determines the delay time. That speed is controlled by an external clock signal, which comes from the LFO.
So the LFO tells the BBD how fast to pass the signal.
Exactly. Faster clock, shorter delay. Slower clock, longer delay, which means a deeper sweep in the flanger effect. And this whole process, it's entirely analog. That's where that classic, sometimes described as warm modulation sound comes from.
Yeah.
That's the foundation. Right. And that tech context takes us straight to the beginning. A really important moment for Bias, actually. 1977, the BF1 Flanger is released.
Yeah, and it wasn't alone, was it? It came out alongside the CE1 Chorus Ensemble, the legendary one.
The big gray box. Yeah.
This was BSS basically saying, look, we're not just making simple overdrives. We can take serious studio effects and put them, near your feet.
But the challenge, as you said, was huge. Taking that complex tape flanging sound, which needed lots of headroom, clean power.
And making it work outside a pristine studio environment. That was the trick.
And the BF1 definitely got the sound right, but that word portable, maybe a bit relative in 77.
Yeah, luggable might be more accurate for the BF1.
Okay, let's dive back to 77 then. The BF1 Flanger. This thing is, historically massive, isn't it? Not just physically.
Absolutely. It's been Ellis's first standalone flanger. And more than that, it kind of established the sonic blueprint, the essential BFS flanger voice that really you can still hear traces of today.
And technically, it was pure analog, right? Built around those BBDs.
Totally analog. BBD's at the core, driven by an LFO. But if you look at how it was built, you see why it was so big. To get those BBDs working properly, especially back then, and to keep the clock noise down, you needed a really stable, robust power supply.
Which explains the size and the power situation.
Exactly. This wasn't your neat little compact pedal. The BF1 was in that larger enclosure, same kind of size as the CE1. And crucially, it had an internal AC mains power supply. It plugged straight into the wall.
No 9-volt battery here.
Nope. It drew about 3 watts, which doesn't sound like much now, but for a pedal then, it was significant. You couldn't just daisy chain this thing.
So that immediately limited who could realistically use it, right? Pros, studios, maybe?
Pretty much. That AC power requirement, the sheer size, It stemmed directly from needing circuitry that was robust enough, clean enough, to deliver that deep analog flange without tons of noise. You needed those higher voltage rails for the headroom to get that really wide liquid sweep.
But despite the size, the controls they gave you were pretty standard, weren't they? Like what you'd find on a rack unit.
Yeah, they nailed the interface. Manual, depth, rate, and resonance. That's your classic flanger control set.
And resonance, that's the feedback control, right? That's key for the really dramatic sounds.
Oh, absolutely. Resonance, or feedback, takes the processed flange signal and feeds a bit of it back into the input. This really emphasizes those frequency notches, makes the sweep much more intense, more metallic sounding.
And if you crank it
Too far, and yeah, it goes into self-oscillation. That's where you get those wild, high-pitched sci-fi sounds. Part of the fun, really.
So sonically, what was the BF1's signature? How did it sound compared to later ones?
It had this really wide, almost liquid quality to the modulation.
Yeah.
The sweep felt very deep, very pronounced notches in the sound. People often describe it as having a really strong sense of motion, almost three-dimensional.
And because of that headroom from the AC power?
Exactly. It could do both subtle, almost chorus-like shimmers, and that really dramatic, powerful jet engine whoosh without just collapsing into noise or distortion immediately. It had range.
So perfect for that late 70s psychedelic sound. Clean tones, leads.
Definitely. Great for swirling cleans, adding texture to leads. Also worked really well on synths and electric pianos, giving them that metallic, resonant character.
Mm.
Really did capture that vintage, maybe slightly saturated, tapish flange sound.
But it wasn't perfect, obviously. There were trade-offs.
For sure, it was big. It needed AC power. And let's be honest, those early analog units, despite the engineering, they could be noisy, especially if you pushed the resonance. BBD clock noise was always a battle back then. Filtering helped, but it was inherent.
So foundational, powerful, but definitely a Gen 1 product.
Absolutely. It set the sonic standard, but BSOS knew they needed to make it more practical, more accessible for the average guitarist.
And they didn't wait long. Just 3 years later, in 1980, the BF2 Flanger arrives. And this is arguably the big one, right? The definitive BSS compact flanger.
It really is. The BF2 is kind of an engineering marvel for its time. They somehow took the sonic depth, that complexity of the BF1, and crammed it into the standard BOSS compact pedal format, that little box we all know.
That's a huge leap in just 3 years.
Yeah.
How did they manage that? Going from a 3-watt AC monster to a little 9-volt pedal.
It took some serious circuit optimization. They stuck with the analog BBD architecture. That was key to the sound. Often using chips like the Panasonic MN3207 BBD paired with its clock driver, the MN3102. Very common pairing.
Okay.
But they had to redesign the surrounding circuit to run efficiently on much lower voltage, the 9 volts from a battery or the old ACA adapter. They had to figure out how to get decent headroom and low noise without those big power rails. That dramatically cut the current draw.
And that switch to 9-volt power, battery, or adapter, that changed everything, didn't it?
Completely. Suddenly, this powerful flanger effect wasn't this exclusive, bulky thing. It was just another pedal you could stick on your board, power with everything else. It opened the floodgates. Everyone could have that sound.
It democratized the BSS flanger sound.
Pretty much. And the BF2 wasn't just practical, it really defined the flanger tone for so many people. It has this really pronounced sweep, quite thick, definitely metallic. When you push the resonance, that iconic jet whoosh. The F2 delivers that in spades.
Some people say it doesn't have quite the same, maybe, liquid depth as the BF1. Less headroom.
That's the common critique, yeah. Running on 9 volts, especially the earlier ACA versions, you perhaps don't get quite the same massive headroom as the AC-powered BF1. But what it did have was this incredibly recognizable, potent sonic signature. It just sounded like a flanger was supposed to sound in the 80s and 90s.
And it was versatile too, right? Where you put it in the chain matters.
Hugely. You could put it before your distortion pedals, and the flange gets chewed up by the drive, giving you that vintage kind of filtered swirling sound. Very 70s, 80s rock.
Like modulating the distortion itself.
Exactly. Or you could put it after distortion, in the effects loop maybe, for a much cleaner, more hi-fi modulation. The sweep sits on top of the distorted tone, cutting through more clearly. Very common in the 80s.
And its impact, culturally, musically, it's massive. It was made for over 20 years.
Yeah, 1980 right through to 2001, that's an incredible run for any pedal. It basically was the flanger sound for the 80s and 90s. You hear it everywhere.
Any specific artists people might know?
Oh, tons. Think about Andy Summers with the Police. That crystalline, atmospheric, clean tone often had a BF2, adding that subtle movement.
Right, that glassy sound.
Yeah. And then on the completely opposite end, you have someone like Kurt Cobain with Nirvana. using it with heavy distortion for a much more chaotic, thick, metallic texture.
Wow, quite the range then.
Absolutely. From subtle shimmer to full-on jet wash, it really is the archetypal compact BOSS flanger. It proved you could get serious analog depth in a small, reliable, battery-powered box.
A true icon. But being by SS, they didn't just rest on their laurels, they saw another need, right? A specific group of players.
Exactly. While the BF2 was conquering guitar pedal boards everywhere, BOSS realized that bass players, well, they have different needs, especially in the low end. A standard guitar flanger doesn't always play nice with bass frequencies.
What happens? Does it thin out the sound?
That's often the problem. You see, the deep notches created by the flanger's cone filtering can easily land right where the fundamental frequencies of the bass guitar sit, when those low notes get canceled out or heavily phase shifted.
You lose the foundation, the punch.
Precisely. The bass sounds weak, thin, loses its power in the mix. So in 1987, BSS introduced a tailored solution, the BF2B bass flanger. The B for bass.
And this wasn't just a paint job, right? They actually changed the circuit.
Oh yeah, it was a proper adaptation. Still analog, still using BBDs, but they specifically modified the frequency response. They tweaked the internal filtering and EQ.
How so? What was the goal?
The goal was to keep the low end solid. They essentially shaped the circuit so the modulation, the sweeping effect, primarily affected the harmonics and the upper mid frequencies of the bass signal.
Ah, so it leaves the fundamental frequencies more or less alone.
Exactly. It lets the core low-end punch through relatively untouched, while still adding that swirling flanger texture on top. So you get the cool effect, but without gutting the bass's main job in the band.
Makes sense. So the BF2B sounds different from the standard BF2, even on guitar.
It does. On bass, it sounds much smoother. It retains that low-end weight, avoids that sometimes brittle, fizzy top end you can get putting a guitar flanger on bass. It provides more of a subtle movement, a coloration, rather than an overwhelming effect.
And this move was pretty significant for Bias too, wasn't it? Showing they were thinking about different instruments.
Yeah, it showed they were really maturing, recognizing niche markets. It lined up with them bringing out other bass-specific pedals around that time, like the CEB3 bass chorus later on. It demonstrated a real understanding that modulation effects, especially analog ones, often need tailoring to the instrument's frequency range.
So the BF2B is kind of the unsung hero for bassists wanting that classic BOSS flange.
It really is. The warmer, low-retaining sibling ensured that classic BF2 generation sound could work effectively for everyone, not just guitarists.
Okay, so that wraps up the big analog era, really. The BF1 laid the ground, the BF2 and 2B absolutely dominated for decades, but then technology marches on. We hit 2001.
Yep, a major turning point. Two things were happening. One, those analog BBD chips were getting harder and more expensive to make and source reliably. Production was winding down globally.
The supply chain issue, even back then.
Kinda, yeah. And second, digital signal processing, DSP, was becoming much more powerful and affordable. So enter the BF3 flanger.
And this is a fundamental shift, isn't it? We're leaving analog behind.
Completely. The core architecture changes entirely. No more BBDs. The BF3 is built around a DSP chip. It generates the flanging effect using algorithms digitally.
And moving to digital, that usually means more features, right?
Oh, absolutely. Suddenly, the limitations of analog circuits, noise, power draw, complexity for adding features, they mostly disappear. With DSP, you're mainly limited by processing power and imagination, and the BF3 really leaned into that flexibility.
What were the big new things it offered?
Well, first off, the I/O got a modern overhaul. True stereo outputs became standard, essential for modern rigs, recording.
Right, stereo flanging can sound huge.
It really can. But maybe even more clever was how they handled the input. Instead of separate guitar and bass models like the BF2 and BF2B,
They combined them.
exactly, the BF3 has dedicated guitar and bass inputs right on the pedal. Plug into the bass input, and the DSP automatically applies EQ adjustments, similar in principle to what the analog BF2B circuit did. It digitally tailors the flanging to preserve low end.
That's smart. One pedal for both instruments.
Very practical. Although, the purist might ask if a digital EQ curve can ever truly replicate the specific analog filtering of the BF2B. Does it sound exactly the same? Probably not. It's cleaner, maybe less organic, but way more convenient.
A typical digital versus analog trade-off there. What else did the DSP enable?
Modern control features. Big one, tap tempo. Finally, you could tap the pedal switch Or use an external one via the expression jack to set the flanger's rate perfectly in time with the music.
Which is crucial for live playing. Trying to dial in an LFO speed by ear is tricky.
Very tricky. And analog LFOs drift. DSP makes tempo sync rock solid. And then the biggest change probably was the mode knob.
Ah, yes, instead of just the 4 standard controls.
You now had a rotary switch to select different flanging algorithms or modes. This massively expanded the sonic palette.
Okay, let's break those modes down. What did they offer?
Well, you had standard mode first. That was BOS's attempt to digitally recreate the classic BF2 sound, the benchmark.
Kind of the legacy mode.
Pretty much. Then you got into the new stuff. Ultra mode was designed for really deep, intense flanging, often exaggerated, super wide sweeps, really leveraging those stereo outputs for huge spatial effects.
Sounds dramatic.
It can be. Then there was gate pan. This was something totally new, really only possible with digital control.
What did that do?
It added rhythmic elements. It could either gate the flanger effect, chopping it on and off rhythmically, or pan the flange sound back and forth in stereo, again, in a rhythmic pattern synced to the tempo. Creates these cool pulsating textures.
Interesting. Almost like a tremolo mixed with flanger.
Sort of, yeah. Or rhythmic panner. Very useful for modern sounds. And finally, momentary mode.
That sounds useful just on when you press it.
Exactly. Hold the pedal down, you get flange. Let go, it turns off instantly. Perfect for just kicking it a quick whoosh for emphasis, like on a cymbal crash or at the end of a phrase, without having to stomp on it and then immediately off again. Super practical live.
So a ton of features packed in there. But the big question, how does it sound compared to the BF1 and BF2? What's the BF3's tonal character?
It's definitely versatile. The GSP allows for incredible precision and range. You can dial in much wider sweeps, much faster or slower rates than the analog circuits could reliably manage. It can get very clean, very clear.
I can do subtle analogish sounds too, you said. The standard mode.
It can get close, yeah. It covers a lot of ground. But its real strength, I think, is in those more extreme, modern stereo sounds that the Ultra and gate pan modes offer. It emphasizes clarity and control.
Well, there's always a but with digital versus analog, isn't there? That warmth factor.
That's the perennial discussion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Many players feel the BF3, while incredibly capable, has a certain digital character. It doesn't quite have the same organic, slightly gritty, warm feel of the BBD-based BF1 and BF2.
And that warmth in the older ones, it wasn't just magic, right? It came from the BBDs themselves.
To a large extent, yes. BBDs inherently generate some noise, especially high-frequency clock noise. To make them usable, designers had to put in quite steep, low-pass filters to cut that noise out.
Filtering out the highs.
Right. And that filtering inevitably rolled off some of the very top end of the audio signal too, making the overall tone sound a bit darker or warmer. Plus, the BBD process itself could introduce subtle artifacts or saturation. The BF3, being digital, doesn't have clock noise like that, needs less aggressive filtering, so it sounds clearer, brighter, maybe sometimes perceived as colder or less dimensional to some ears.
So the clarity and precision of the BF3 is kind of the opposite side of the coin to the inherent characteristics, maybe limitations of the BF2's analog tech?
That's a great way to put it. The BF3 represents BOSS, bridging that analog legacy with modern digital power and features. It became the new standard, the reliable, feature-packed digital platform for flanging in the 21st century. Less about perfectly copying the past, more about providing tools for the present and future.
Okay, so we've gone from 1977 all the way to the present day with the BF3. Let's try and synthesize this whole journey. Looking back, what are the key takeaways from this evolution?
Well, if you stack them up, the core technology shift is the big story, right? BF1, BF2, BF2B, they're all fundamentally analog, built around BBDs. Their sound signature, that warmth, that movement, it comes from the nature of those analog components.
The sound is tied to the physical tech.
Exactly. Then the BF3 makes the jump to DSP digital. And that unlocks clarity, precision, a much wider range, and all those modern features, stereo, tap tempo, modes, different technology, different strengths.
And tied into that is the move from mono to stereo.
Crucial point. The BF1, BF2, BF2B were all mono pedals, input and output. That was standard for the time.
Simple setup.
Yep. The BF3 was the first BFS flanger to offer true stereo outputs. That was a huge deal for players using stereo rigs, running effects loops, or recording. It allows those big, spacious flanger sounds to really open up.
So if we summarize the focus of each generation.
Okay, BF1 era. The focus was purely on capturing that studio-quality analog depth. Fidelity was king, even if it meant a huge box and AC power. It was about proving it could be done.
Get the sound right first.
Right. Then the BF2 era shifted focus dramatically to compactness and accessibility. solve the power issue, shrink it down, make it affordable. And in doing that, they accidentally created the iconic flanger voice for decades.
Portability and defining the sound.
Exactly. And then the BF3 era is all about feature expansion and versatility. Stereo, tap tempo, multiple sounds in one box, bass compatibility built in. It's about giving the modern player maximum functionality and stage readiness.
So you can really see BSS wrestling with different priorities over time. Fidelity, then portability, then specialization with the BF2B, and finally functionality with the BF3.
Absolutely. Each pedal is like a snapshot of the technology and the player demands of its specific time. It's a fantastic case study in how engineering constraints and goals directly shape the tone we end up hearing and loving.
So for you listening, if you're trying to choose between these, understanding this history is really helpful, isn't it?
Definitely. If you crave that specific, slightly dark, chewy, maybe a little noisy, classic 80s analog flange sound, you're probably looking for a BF2, or maybe even a BF1 if you can find one and deal with the size.
The vintage analog route.
Right. But if you need crystal clarity, rock-solid tempo sync, huge stereo width, the flexibility to switch between very different flange textures, and maybe you play bass sometimes too, and you're okay with a sound that might be perceived as cleaner or less warm,
Then the BF3 is the obvious modern choice.
it really is. It's the versatile, reliable workhorse for today's player.
Okay, let's wrap this up. Quick recap of the key nuggets here. BF1 established the deep analog foundation sound. BF2 made it compact, iconic, took over the world. BF3 brought flanging into the digital age with stereo, tons of features, and catered to both guitar and bass.
That sums it up nicely. From analog constraints came character, from digital freedom came features. And that whole journey, it does leave us with a fascinating thought, doesn't it? About where things go next.
Yeah, that constant debate, analog character versus digital convenience. It feels like you always have to choose one or the other.
Well, maybe not forever. Here's something for you, the listener, to think about. We've seen digital modeling get incredibly sophisticated, right? Emulating amps, drives, even complex analog delays.
Yeah, it's getting scarily good.
So what if the next evolution of a pedal like the BF3 isn't just adding more digital features, but involves hyper-realistic digital modeling of the old analog circuits? Imagine a future BF4, maybe, that uses its DSP to precisely model the behavior of the MN3207 BBD chip from the BF2, including its specific filtering, its noise floor, its subtle saturation.
So you'd have the digital platform, stereo, tap tempo, modes, but with an algorithm inside that perfectly mimics the old analog warmth and grit.
Exactly. If that becomes possible, and convincingly so, does that historical divide, that whole argument about analog warmth versus digital precision, does it finally just melt away? If digital can perfectly replicate analog, flaws and all, what does analog even mean anymore in terms of sound?
Wow. That's, yeah, that's definitely something to chew on. The lines could get very blurry indeed.
Food for thought.